Well, welcome to the Community Preservation Committee meeting of Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. We are now moving into the deliberations phases of this year's funding cycle. We'll start with a roll call, and I'll just go around in the order I see you on my screen. Ed, if you would state your name and who you represent.
Edward Larner, representing housing for the Concord Housing Authority.
Thank you very much, Ed. John.
John Kratsley, the Select Board appointee.
Eve.
Eve Eisenberg, Select Board appointee.
Paul.
Paul Bohm, Recreation Commission appointee.
Thank you. Bill.
Bill Kameza, representing Natural Resources Commission.
Okay. Sue.
Sue Felshen, representing the Planning Board.
Thank you. And Nancy.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission.
And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. So what I'll do to start off things is just run through what our agenda is and so give it an idea where we are. So I'd like Anne to just run through any additional new materials we've received, make sure we've all had a chance to see those things. The next item on the agenda after that is to review our evaluation criteria. I think that's going to sort of bleed into our discussion on the recommendations for particular projects. I think and maybe what we'll do is we'll first just highlight the amount of funding that's available for this cycle, because I think that sort of really shapes our discussion going forward. In years past, when I think back to us meeting out on Kais Road, we oftentimes are faced with a shortfall, and we go through and we think about, well, which ones of these maybe could be funded over a period of years, which ones should we send back to the applicant to maybe provide some additional rigor or detail in an application that they might bring next year. I think here we are not so much constrained by the cap on the funding, because as we'll discuss, we have more funding than we have applications for, but maybe more just generally whether we think the applications meet the criteria for CPC, whether we think they have merit, or whether there are ones. I think part of that discussion can be whether there are ones we have concerns about that could be addressed as part of the grant agreement, in terms of covenants that they might have for the funding. I'll pause. Diane, would you state your name and who you're part of?
Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee. We've been having problems with our Zoom, and
not a worry.
Got it.
It appears that you have a peregrine falcon sitting on your shoulder.
No, yes, my husband carved it actually.
Oh, well, that's a beautiful
He
carving.
carves birds. It's quite beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. So with that, Anne, if I may, and I know I'm putting you a little on the spot here, can you just let us know whether there's any new materials received since our last meeting? And I know I highlighted some of the letters of support we'd received at that time, but are there any new materials that we should be aware of?
Yes, there are a few new letters of support. There were, let's see, there was certainly one from Giroux.
That's for Giroux.
So there's a lot.
Right.
We touched on some of those last time. That ORS, Natural Resources Commission, the Giroux family member.
Right. It was the WCAC letter of support. Do you want me to bring that up?
WCAC. Sure. Yeah. West Concord Advisory Committee. Yeah. I'm realizing they don't just show up in chronological order. So thanks for bringing this up, because I didn't review this, I guess, ahead of this meeting. So West Concord Advisory Committee, a subcommittee of the planning, or not a subcommittee, but an advisory committee to the planning board. It looks like generally recommending the phase 2 Giroux application. Okay. Thank you, Anne. Is there any other additional new materials?
Yes, sorry. There was a letter of support from the Historical Commission for their application. And there was also a letter from Anka Voss of Special Collections for the
Right. I saw that.
right.
Okay, so Anka, we heard directly from when we did the site visit, or well, a little bit from. She wasn't really presenting. Obviously, in support of the town archivists' preservation efforts, and then the letter from CHC highlighting a couple of the neighborhoods that would be part of the modern structures report. I don't think you need to pull those up, but I would encourage people if they've got questions about those to take a look at those. And now next, Anne, would you let us know what we think we've got some rough numbers that you provided to Paul and I in terms of where we think the funding will come based upon what the community preservation, the state organization has provided us with, that are ballpark figures at least. Do you want to tell us what those numbers are?
Sure. Let's see. All right, the FY24 surcharge was 1.6 million. The state match was about 300,000, so that creates a total of 1.9 million, roughly. There was, and I guess we don't know yet the earnings on investments, so that's pending from finance. The open space reserve was 250,000. And then trying to figure out what is actually in the, let's see, like leftover from previous years. You know, these are just rough numbers. There were project funds returned to the general fund in FY24. That was 240,000. And then the last year you left 450,000 in the prior year funding balance. So let me just bring this up. So those are just, these are all estimates. We haven't heard from, we haven't heard from the finance division yet. But adding all of those up, that would be a total of 2.9 million.
Approximately.
Approximately.
Without interest.
Without
Right,
interest,
and the
right.
interest is probably actually pretty sizable given the current interest rates. I remember last year being somewhat surprised by how much interest we made, and of course we've had $450,000 sitting in there. Well, actually, depending on when that 240K, well, it hasn't been spent. So really, we probably have about $1 million sitting in the account, which is so that interest amount could be $50,000, just based upon the rates the town gets, I'm guessing, and my vague recollection of last year. So the point being, we are accumulating funds significantly faster than the applications we're receiving for them. So it has always been the case since I've been on the committee that oftentimes we are at the last minute when we're looking at the numbers, we're a little bit surprised in the amount of funding we have. We sort of go off the initial estimate of what we think is the actual property the property tax for the year. We get the state number, which varies from year to year. And this year and do you know what that percentage, or Paul, what that percentage was this year? Am I remembering right? It's around 18%, somewhere around there.
Excuse me, what percent of what? I'm sorry again.
The state match.
Oh, the state.
Yeah.
Could do the math. It's 299 over 1.6. Yeah.
Oh, so 299,000
over 1.658 million.
So it's an 18%.
Roughly
match.
18%. Yeah.
18%.
Yeah,
I just looked up the
18%. So historically down from where we were, but still a pretty sizable contribution in this year, and down because more and more communities are participating in the Community Preservation Act. So as more communities participate, the funds that are generated through transaction fees at the registries of deeds is dispersed more widely. It's also been a change that more cities have been participating, so that number's gone down. But through different legislative actions, they've sort of tried to tap it back up. So 18% roughly. But for the purpose of tonight's discussion, I think the long and short of it is we have well over $1 million than what has been requested from us for funding, which I think just can bring us then to the discussion of the particular applications. And maybe the way we should approach them is first, if anybody has, we haven't assigned out particular applications to individuals on the committee. I don't think we need to go through in any particular order, but maybe if people want to raise any concerns with any, actually, perhaps we can start by saying which ones we think are a slam dunk. And we can then table those for discussion, because every year there's about 2 or 3 that are a slam dunk. Having said that, I see Eve's hand raised.
Before we get into that, I just have a quick question. I thought that 10% of our funding needed to go to historic, and it looks like we're below that, like at 5%. Is that a problem?
It is, yeah. And we can address that. And I haven't done that math, so thank you, Eve, for doing that. I'm wondering which one. We'll need to get to that in our discussion. But if we don't get to 10%, what we can do is essentially we can bank it for future years in that category.
Right.
Yeah, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a comment on the overall funding. It's remarkable, and I guess it's good news that we have, close to $3 million in total, and maybe half of that in applications. Who knows what's going to happen next year? But is this something we should be happy about, worry about, be neutral about? I don't know how to feel about it, other than it's in the bank and that's fine. But I don't know, just sort of throwing out there as an open-ended question.
It's an excellent question. Yeah, Nancy.
I think it's the first time I've seen it, so I wouldn't call it a trend. And I might think of it as more of an aberration. I bet.
I mean, so it's so a big chunk of it is that $450,000 balance that we've reserved for future, for future years, knowing that there would be lumpy requests around preservation. Then we had the very unusual situation of $240,000 being returned because Habitat for Humanity stepped in and built a house that we'd funded. So that's anomalous. I think what's really anomalous, though, this year is the reduction in the number of applications. I was very surprised that I don't think we got any applications from non-town entities or non-town affiliated entities, and that the funding requests went down. And I don't know what machinations go on behind the scenes in terms of, the town deciding what they want to ask for in a particular year. There was a lot of sort of discussion around that last year around town meeting, with FinCom's concerns around whether town requests were aligned with town budget priorities and the like. Maybe later when we get to public comment, we'll turn to, Linda or Mary might have some input on that. But I think we sort of had a little bit of a perfect storm here, with both having saved a lot of money previously, had a big thing come back, and then having a really unusual drop off in the applications. Diane.
Thank you. I'm curious about something, and I know this is asking us to question protocol of all sorts, but I've noticed that the schools are trying to build amenities buildings to attach to the football field, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the budget. The school budgets is putting a lot of pressure on FinCom in so many ways. Has a CPC ever acted proactively and said, look, we think we have some resources. This is ADA. I mean, it has to do with, being compliant with disabilities. It has all sorts of, aspects to it. Have we ever thought about reaching out and saying, how can we support you? And we urge you to make a late and extraordinary application. Now, I know it goes against all the rules, but to what degree in society are we bounded by rules when we can see an aspect of our community struggling in a major way? So I just wondered. Nobody put me up to this. This is just me, thinking about everything that's going on in the town right now. So
I'll just comment to say I'm not aware of that precedent happening, as you alluded to. But with that said, I see a lot of hands that have just been raised in the order that I saw them come up. Paul.
Yeah, there was an interesting discussion last night at the joint meeting of FinCom Select Board and School Committee. That topic came up, Diane, and I'll have to
Yeah,
look
I
at the
was there.
recording, but my understanding was that the school committee was basically saying that they're looking for private donation. They weren't looking to the town. They were looking to fund that elsewhere. And, honestly, that might be my preference if they can raise that as opposed to our offering that. But I think we just, and I think you're on that call too. So I wasn't quite clear what the answer was there. But that funding may be coming from elsewhere. But that doesn't answer your question. But just a point of information.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Bill.
Yeah, I would just say I'd feel very uncomfortable reaching out in that way. I think it does set a precedent, and then there'll be others who will say, "Well, why didn't you reach out to us? We have needs in whatever area it is." And then all of a sudden we're in areas that we shouldn't be in. It's better for us to receive these applications, I think, than to generate that kind of forward looking.
It's far better. It is far better for us to receive them. I was just.
No, I understand, Diane. I get the picture.
Bill, it's a good input, and I would also just point out that, I think the housing community, when they saw we were undersubscribed, they did proactively reach out and say, "Hey, bank it because we're going to come back to you."
Sure.
They've been following along closely. Eve.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention that a member of the school board reached out to me last month to talk about that building and said that they understood that they were too late to apply for this round of funding, but that we should expect to see something next year.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think just in my mind, tonight we're going to consider the applications that we have in front of us, and I think we'll probably get through that relatively quickly. And then we are going to talk about, well, what do we do? What constraints or limits or direction do we put around whatever's left over? So that's definitely part of that conversation. Nancy.
I would just say that there has been at least one request to offer a late application. And at that point, we didn't go for it, and I would be uncomfortable with this.
Right. And I think and Anne, I'm going to call on you, so I'm going to give you a second to turn your ears on and turn your mute off. I think we got that, and you took a look at our funding guidance, and there was one limited category in which we could consider late applications, which was essentially, if I'm not mistaken, a land acquisition opportunity that came along, right?
Right.
Is that correct, Ann?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and otherwise in our
In the bylaws, we're not meant to do this.
yeah, the bylaws isn't right. Our the CPC charter. I always forget how it's actually referred to. That's the exception to the guidelines, and I would just say I would feel quite uncomfortable recommending funding for a project and showing any kind of special favor. Just especially, I mean, that may be the best use of town money and the best way to reduce, conflicting demands that we'll see, at FinCom or at town meeting or what have you. But I wouldn't want to sort of wade into that with the CPC. Paul.
I think you're all very wise.
Burton, as a segue into the discussion of applications, I have a question. The presentation that Thoreau Elementary School application, were they reducing their ask and formally, because I think it was at least 50, 60,000 less that was on their slides than was on their application. So I wasn't quite sure what we're making.
I think that's a really good question, Paul. I think when we looked at it, their application wasn't modified, but their budget, which they had based their estimates on, was like $60,000 less. And you or somebody else raised it when we had Dr. Hunter here, and she said, well, she'd love to get the additional funding. But those were their numbers today. So I don't think they formally reduced their application number, but what they provided us as a budget suggests that they wouldn't actually deplete the funds we allocate to them.
But doesn't
In full.
does that sort of beg the question? Well, okay, what would they? We're asking for budgets. What would they use the extra money for? I'm not trying to be the Grinch here, but I'm just I'm the treasurer.
Well, and
so figure this out.
Yeah, well, no, it's a great it's great question, and I think that it would certainly be within our purview to say, well, you applied for. I'm just pulling numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but you applied for $500,000. Your budget appears to be 440 or 460, whatever the numbers were. We'll grant you 460 and make do with that. I mean, certainly we've given folks
Done that
haircuts before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like we're tied to a particular number.
Well, I didn't mean to
yes.
derail things, but there is such a clear need in town for some things. And I thought,
Yeah.
what committee sits around with extra money? I mean, none
Right.
that I've attended in the last 5 years.
It's a little remarkable.
And I understand. So, and we'll use it in the future. I know. So,
Yeah, and there's also I know just at the high school, there's the discussion around the ADA compliant restroom facilities. There's discussion about a track that's on the high school,
Right.
where the landfill used to be, things like that, and I think that we need that direction to come in the form of an app, with a priority to come in the form of an application from CCA, the Concord Carlisle schools.
Yeah.
Okay. Just getting back to the agenda, making sure we're staying on track. So we know now what the funding available is. That's not our limitation. And I think what we should do is now turn to the individual applications to discuss. Just for sake of efficiency, I would suggest that we first identify any that we think are a slam dunk, and we can sort of move those. And if you're keeping notes, sort of over into the column of fully funded or potential no funding, if we had a consensus on that. Eve.
Obviously, staff and technical services. That
Staff
last
and
one.
technicals. Okay. All right. So
Yeah.
let's take these one at a time. So staffing and technical services, we've approved it multiple times in the past. This time it is a significantly higher percentage as in terms of the funding request. I calculated it at about 3%. In years prior, it was probably woefully inadequate, especially given our demands on town council and reviewing things. Does anybody think that this should not be a slam dunk and go through with 50,000?
No.
All right. So, Anne, let's put that in. It's good we got that one established. Anne will now take good notes. So that one's I think in the sure thing. Does anybody else have one they want to put up as for consideration as a?
Yeah, I'd like to say something, but I think the historic records preservation is the
yeah,
same.
that's what I was going to say.
Okay, $32,000 that was for. Tied, I guess is the selling points is tied in no small part to the 250th, and it's a relatively modest application for some pretty important historical things. Does anybody have an objection to that suggestion from Bill? I'm in full agreement, certainly. Okay. So, and the process here, just as I'm going through this is not definitive necessarily. Well, we will ultimately be considering all of these funding, all this funding as a package, but just to get, to work through the applications this evening. So let's go ahead and put $32,000 there. Okay. The others, so just to run through, we've got the municipal affordable
Ed
housing.
Garner has his hand up, if you can
Yes.
see it. If you can, yeah.
Actually, I can't. I need to change my
That's what I-
screen. Yes, Ed,
that's what I was
please.
Sorry, Burton. I was just going to suggest that the Regional Housing Services Office budget of 43,500 be approved. Actually, the housing people put a lot of effort comes out of that thing that we keep adding things, and they keep saying no, we can do it within the budget. So they're very good about keeping their budget low.
And thank you for advocating for that. And this year we did see a little bit of a bump up because of that. They're wanting to be able to have overlap in staff as their current director is retiring. seemed like a very logical thing to do, given I think the deep personal knowledge that the retiring director has. Does
Mhm.
anybody object to Ed's suggestion that the RISO be funded at its full funding request?
No.
Okay.
And
All right.
as far as the, the Affordable Trust thing, Keith's here, and maybe we'll want to talk about this. Not, I don't think it's a slam dunk in the sense that the
Mhm.
housing needs are quite dire nowadays. So.
Yeah. Thank you for. I think that's a good one to turn to next, though. Diane, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, that's the one I was going to mention, actually, is the Affordable Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. For anybody who happened to tune into the select board meeting last evening, Mary Hartman comported herself with enormous dignity through a very difficult meeting. And not just dignity, but intelligence. And clearly the need for affordable housing in our town is huge. And I think that since we have the resources, I'm one often to kind of look at that budget and ask if we can pare it down a little bit, but under the present circumstances, I feel a robust enthusiasm for that money as it is presently presented.
Yeah, thank you for that that advocacy, Diane. I'll say one thing and then turn it over. I want to point out this is $740,000, $240,000 of which we previously decided was worthwhile expenditure on housing, but the housing organizations have managed to get somebody else to spend that money. So that money's coming back and they're just asking for it to be reallocated back out the door to housing. So this is, in my mind, this is really a new $500,000 request.
Right.
My only concerns that I've raised this before is that this shift that happened last year in terms of from us funding particular projects to us putting funds in the trust, as with the passage of time, that's less and less of a concern of mine, given the very able stewardship the trust has and the way that money is being put to use. I just want to make sure that the funding doesn't sit there unspent, given, for example, our and it wasn't a result of giving it to the trust, but what happened with the Junction Village project, where almost $1 million sat there and did not go to supporting affordable housing directly for, it was banked for about 5 years in total, or 4 years or
more
something
than
like
that, I think.
Yeah, it was 3 funding cycles at the very least.
Yep.
So I've got less concern about that. I'll say that, and now if anybody else has any points on it,
You can't see me, Burton, but
I can now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good. I was thinking that we should talk about the last year's requests, which were actually 5 from housing, but got reduced because of Keith Bergman's work with the other 2 agencies, and the money that was used for a buy down for a condo that the housing authority did was able. We can't go through CPC and ask them to buy a specific house because the housing market won't allow the time it needs. So of the 500,000, some of that is going back into buy down. It was used in last year's total that was approved. So that's one of the reasons we have less. That's 2 less requests compared to last year. So and I don't want to speak for Keith on this, but maybe he could talk about the possibility of additional funding, because I just came out of that meeting that was held by the Affordable Trust, and Lee Smith talked about their problems of the buy downs that they want to do, where they're going to have to come up with. They use an example of a 2-bedroom condo. They would need 400,000. In addition to the funds that they're able to get in order to do this. So there may be a greater need this year than what was done last year. So anyway, I don't know if Keith wants to speak about this or not.
Before we turn it over to Keith, Ed, thank you for a reminder for the committee or for anybody that wasn't on last year. The housing came and as a result of some of those housing requests, we were well oversubscribed. those groups that went back to the trust, essentially got funding from the trust, which brought us under the amount we had for the funds, and that was some good collaboration, I think, with CPC at that time, and certainly, as I said earlier, there has been the request. I don't think we have authority within the committee to increase the request for this year, because that was the funding request is what it is, and we've got the rules we just talked about, under the special circumstances under which we could consider a late request, and I don't think housing falls within that. But we have received the request about banking money for a future year, so it could be that we say, all right, we're gonna one of our things that we're going to do is signal to the housing that we're locking up some funds for a future year, so that if in a few, let's say next year, we are oversubscribed, we've got those housing funds that could go above and beyond the funding we have for next year to housing. Diane.
Well, last year, and thank you for that wonderful review by everybody. I mean, last year, one of the concerns I had was that we would not be able to observe with the same care that we usually bring to things, how that money was being spent, if great lumps of money were passed over to the Affordable Housing
Right.
Trust. And so we were anxious about that. And I just think to keep on record the fact that continues to be an issue, and that our detailed control of these things is mitigated by passing over great lumps. But under the circumstances, given the needs, it seems to me that, and the very competent leadership that is managing it right now, and also collaboration. I mean, there's such good cooperation between the housing efforts, and that hasn't always been true, but it is so good now, right now, that it seems to me, prudent. But I'd like to just on the record a little asterisk that says, as long as that the fine leadership and collaboration between entities continues to be so robust and impressive. Does that make sense, or is that a stingy comment?
No, I think that totally makes sense, and I think we would be abdicating our responsibility as a committee if we weren't taking that approach. Nancy, I saw your hand raised and then it went up and came down.
I just wanted to clarify that we are talking about the $740,000.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, for the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. Yes. Paul.
No, just monitoring the conversation. I think we've morphed into a slam dunk with this application. I want to preempt the discussion, but
I'm with you, Paul. Does anybody have any particular concern or any issues? Keith, thank you for joining us this evening, but we may not need your advocacy. Does anybody have any particular concern about funding this one to the full amount requested?
No.
Yeah, neither do I. So Keith, okay, the screen sharing. So Keith, thank you very much for showing up.
Happy to take yes for an answer. Thanks so much.
Yes, exactly. There you go. What's that aphorism about knowing when to stop asking? Okay, wonderful. So that takes us largely through. So the remaining ones we've got, if I'm not missing one, and Anne, keep me honest here, is the preservation survey, the proposal you put together for the modern structures. Thank you. Giroux Phase 2 design and the CPS Thoreau Field. Those are the remainders. Okay, Paul, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't know if we're in the slam dunk territory or the deliberation territory, but the letters of support on the Giroux project were pretty, there are a lot of them. And I remember when Kerry briefed the Warner's Pond Task Force, and Bill, you were there.
Yeah.
She said a project like this would really benefit from a community, a large scale support. And I think that project has large scale support. I don't want to preempt our discussion on that, but I just want to make that observation.
Thank you, Paul. Does anybody else have any comments on Giroux Phase 2 design?
No, I think it's great.
It does look great. I've been going over there frequently now just to see how things are going at the park. I've been over there probably every other day for the past month. I'm astonished at how much use it's getting even now. And
Yes.
so I think access is significant to have some access down to the water is important.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
That's it.
I'm not over there every other day, but I've been going over there quite a bit, and
Yeah.
and it's nice to see it's finally sort of the pieces have clicked together, and it's great to see that parking lot there, but full virtually every time I
Yes,
drive by.
yes. Yeah, it's amazing.
Sue.
Yeah, I just want to note, since we have had a lot of citizen concern over the years because of the difficulties with the project, that the reason it seems like a slam dunk now is that conditions have changed in terms of how the project is being overseen and how the town is handling the park. So I expect that we will get some questions from the public that we should be prepared for, but this one seems like a slam dunk to me
That's beautiful.
in terms of us supporting it.
Just one more observation. It's important that I think there was a concern that Public Works was sort of out of the loop and they were going to maintain it. Public Works is now directly in the loop in terms of budgeting and through the recreation revolving fund. So I think that uncertainty, Sue and others, has been taken care of. And that was in addition to the construction, that was a bit of an irritant about, about maintenance of the park. Who was responsible? What it would cost? And I think that is that's been resolved.
Yeah. I will say my concerns around this application when I first saw it was, does this interfere with a deliberative process around Warner's Pond, right? Having seen the letters of support from people on all sides, in particular from the Warner's Pond committee, and having reached out individually to some members of that I know some of are then pro dredge, pro dam removal, whatever, they don't see this as an interference in that process. And that it does not conflict with that. That's what I'm seeing. Then there was the concerns, for loyal Concord Bridge readers around the overall management of the first phase of the project. That seems to have been, not to say, just to say prior administration, but it's now being carefully managed. I believe we saw that the Attorney General's office looked at how that project was managed and didn't find malfeasance, or I don't have the words, but that's kind of, I guess in some that's come to a closure, that issue. And certainly current town management is looking at it, it seems to be managing it well and seems to have come to a good closure with phase one. So those were my concerns with the project, and those have now been well resolved. So I guess then, as I mentioned, one other thing was that there's the idea that there waterfront access, boating or swimming or anything on the pond was maybe overtaken by the White Pond donation and the amazing facilities we have there. One thing that really struck me when we had the applicant presenting to the committee is, well, even if the dam's removed, this could provide kayaking access to the Neshoba Brook and the like. And I thought, that hadn't even occurred to me, which is a very different type of recreational access than they have at White Pond. So I was wary originally about this application. I'm no longer. Eve.
Thanks, Burton. Actually, what you said is really super important to me. You pretty much answered all of my questions, which was more about the timing of this, because a design and a cost estimate really does. It would be, I think it would be premature if the pond, the fate of the pond was decided after the cost estimation of a dock was. We just don't want to fund something that gets thrown away or shelved. But
of course,
if you're in your discovery period, you've discovered that they actually have that timing under control. That was my question from the last time we spoke with those folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea is that regardless of the disposition or the outcome of the public process on the pond, that there will be water in front of Giroux Park, whether it's the size of the pond now or a smaller pond with a connection to the Neshoba Brook, there will be water there, and water access will remain important. Paul.
I just want to highlight, there's a lot of differences between White Pond and Waters Pond, but the one we should keep track of is White Pond requires membership to take advantage of it, and Giroux does not. Giroux is access to everybody. So that's not a negative statement about White Pond, but they're different situations, and
Yeah.
so I'll throw that in there.
Thanks, Phil. Bill.
Simple. As co-chair of that Warner's Pond Task Force, it's the one time, well, one of few times where there was absolute unanimity in the vote to support this. Because regardless of what work group you were in, whether you were for dam removal or for, we all agreed that there should be access, and we all agreed, frankly, that there ought to be some kind of a dock or some sort of a way from Giroux to the water, whether it's the smaller pond that would be created after the if the dam came out, or the larger pond that's been dredged, or anything else. So we all agreed on that. So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I just would like to clarify, I definitely think we should support this. The timing question I had was whether or not we were asking the design and engineers crew to price out alternates, which is a more expensive process than actually pricing out what you're actually doing, which you would have to know what was going on with the pond before you knew what you were actually doing. So that was the time.
I can speak to that a little bit, Eve, just a bit more detail perhaps than we need, but the deep hole, which is right in front of Giroux property, that's the deep hole of the pond. That is where any dam would go in, where any dock would go in, regardless of whether it's a stream or whether it's a big pond. It'd be in the same place, so there's really not much change there either.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I will just say as a last point, I started commuting on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail back about 13 years ago, but actually 14 years ago, before I moved to Concord 13 years ago. And one of my favorite things was stopping at the pond up in Westford, where there's a public beach. It's completely open, and you can stop, and I'd get there at about 7 o'clock in the morning when the mist would be on the water, and and it was just such a wonderful resource. And I thought, when the Giroux land came along, I thought, gosh, that would be wonderful if Concord had that, and it would be so great to do it. And it's been 14 years in the coming from my viewpoint. So shall we move this to the phase 2 design to sure thing? We've got here no objections. Okay. Yep. We're down to 2. I'm going to suggest unless anybody objects, that we talk about the preservation survey. Okay. Preservation survey of modern structures. So we did have that additional letter of support, right? I believe. Is that correct, Anne? And I know this is your application. I'm not going to call on you on this one, but did we have that letter of support?
Yes, you did get that
from
letter.
Concord, from the Historic Commission. Yeah, right. Yep. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any comments, concerns, questions? Scope? Thank you, Nancy.
I would just like to say, I think this is going to be a very exciting thing to put the spotlight finally on these resources that have been trying to come to the fore for a long time. And I think we're going to be surprised by how important they turn out to be to the community as a whole.
Thank you. Diane.
And wonderful conversations with people who are on the Historic Districts Commission, and listening to them, I've become heartily persuaded that this is a valuable endeavor. As you remember, I was a little concerned about the fact that it was going to save time. I wasn't sure it was going to save time for whom or why. But I do think that aside from that, I believe that the actual having this on record is invaluable for the town for so many reasons.
Ed.
Is someone old enough to remember when all the new type of architecture of the MIT places, Acorn Homes and so forth, were coming into town and thinking, gee, Concord is really, ahead of, or is like on top of the architectural aesthetic of what a town, an older town can be. And I'm thinking that, highlighting these, some of these, buildings that still exist might inspire, the town to be a little more creative about some of McMansions that are going up and so forth. So I think it's a great project.
Sue, thanks, Ed, for those words. Sue.
Well, having read things more than I previously knew about these structures and how they came to be, I can't help but be struck that they were aimed as a housing solution for the everyman, and yet they completely and utterly fail in that they are an early form of suburban sprawl and poor land use and leading to housing unaffordability. But they meant well, and it is an important part of our history, and I have absolutely no problem at all. I support this this application. It is part of our history and deserving in that sense.
No, I appreciate that somewhat contrarian take, Sue. Nancy.
I have to object. I think these houses form the basis for every man to have an affordable house. I grew up in a post-World War II, ticky-tacky, everything the same suburb, but people who would have never been able to. And the countertop at the Gropius house, same as the one I grew up with. So it had incredible scope and influence.
John.
Yeah, my only concern, which I asked Ann about, was who would supervise the consultant. I gather it's Ann, and I was concerned about the volume of work. But she, I believe, has assured us the last time I asked that this fit well within her range of activities, and it's being going to be supervised in the right part of our town government. So, Ann, am I right?
Yes, I can pace myself and make sure it's done correctly.
Okay. Well, the things that I've thought about with this application is, first of all, I believe it was, if I'm not misremembering, the last time this was done in town was in the 1990s, and that's essentially the cutoff for these houses that have been identified for historic preservation. And I've seen historic preservation efforts go a little bit sideways when the record keeping on whether something was historic or not was done correctly. So I think that it's really important to have a record of it. And I also think most of these houses are sort of going through the great filter period, right? We talk about historic architecture that you love, and it's oftentimes because of all the bad architecture from a particular period in time was long ago knocked down, and only the best examples remain. And we're right at that period where these houses are, many of them probably reaching the end of their original useful life. That's not to say they can't be rejuvenated, like the Gropius house in Lincoln has obviously been very well preserved.
Yeah.
But they've reached that period where they're perhaps at their most vulnerable, especially given that there are almost no developable single family lots left in Concord, and we know that current market demand is 4,000 to 7,000 square foot. This sort of cottage colonial style, which doesn't quite jive with the deck house look. So I think that, in other words, that's a long-winded way of saying I think this is really timely, and this is a style of architecture which I'm particularly fond of, and I hope that people, this gives people some appreciation. So I'm in full support. Bill, you've raised your hand.
Just a small thing, and I'm just curious. I happen to have lived in one for a long time. There's a whole series of houses built during the Depression. They were built by a fellow called Whit Brown. Is that on your list anywhere? I'll give you an example. I lived on one on Everett Street. That's been knocked down. There's another one on Everett. There's also one on near the Alcott School. They're very distinct. And I'm just curious as to whether there's one on Monroe Place. So I don't know if you know about these houses, but they're very unusual. There are no basements in the houses, and low ceilings, but they're like cottages. They're beautiful little cottages. So I don't know whether that's part of your survey or not, but it's worth thinking about as they disappear, clearly.
Right, the name is new to me, but thank you so much for bringing it up. And these are the stories we want to gather and make sure that there's a record of them. Even if we can't get to them in this survey, they should be on the list for the future.
Yeah, his name is Whit, I think W-H-I-T. I'm not sure how the first name, but it's Whit Brown Houses.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Cool.
Hearing a lot of enthusiasm, I'm going to assume that we're comfortable with this one as well. I'm seeing nods and no shaking heads or thumbs down. This brings us to the one which I think we'll have more discussion around. And maybe if it's whether or not we think that funding is merited, maybe what we would want to see in terms of if we do think it's a worthwhile project to fund, whether we would want to see any particular covenants in the grant agreement. And we will have plenty of time to discuss that in the future, but it would be nice to get a sense of the committee on this. I also think there will be some questions, as I think I mentioned before, I'm going to be previewing this budget to the select board in early December, and there might be some questions around this particular one as well there. So it'd be nice to have a sense of where the committee's thoughts on this. So this is CPS Thoreau Field for $500,000, or potentially $460,000, whatever the budget number was. Paul.
It might be helpful. There was one graphic from the presentation, which is in the documents that were just added to the website. It shows the whole layout with the budget. It might be useful for the group to just look at that one slide.
Absolutely, I'm looking at it now. It's a great picture.
Yeah, and are you able to display that? That was a slide that the proponents were presenting last time.
Mm-hmm.
Try to bring that up. Just a
Thanks.
minute.
It's on the website. You added it to the website.
With all the problems that we had last year at the time meeting about the middle school, I think it's nice that this is a kind of project that most people are going to support, and not to be contrary to the idea that the schools get too much money and so forth. I just think these are the types of projects that fit kind of our budget rather than the massive middle school that we participated in on their fields.
I have it up on my screen if Ann can't get, Ann has it now. Yes.
So
Nope.
was it a part of their original application?
No, it was a supplemental material received.
Okay.
You put it up on the website under supplementary information on applications.
All right, just a second.
I know.
He's everywhere.
No Zoom bombing.
Would you like me to share my screen? I have it here if you want me to.
Oh, I've got it.
I
Sorry.
have
You have
it?
to be
Okay.
made a co-host to do that, Bill, but I don't know.
Anne said she had it.
She has it.
This one.
Okay, now that we've got that up, Sue has been waiting patiently. So with your hand raised, yes.
Well, I have a question, and excuse my ignorance, but this is about how things work with the CPC. So this is a request for money under recreation.
Yes.
When it is public recreation for the town, I think that's clearly what the recreation bucket is for. When it is recreation for the use by school students, does that fall under CPC allowable expenditure? Now, let me just continue a moment. I understand that the school property is in fact available to the public outside of designated school hours when it is not available, whatever those may be, which includes after school weekends, the entirety of the summer, unless there are school activities during the summer I'm unaware of. But how does that work out in terms of what we fund and what we don't fund? Is there some, like, does somebody determine this is X percentage purely public and X percentage schools, and then Y percentage schools, and then we only fund the X percentage part? How does that work?
Sue, I don't think there's anything quite as crisp as that. But I will tell you, when we considered the 250 trees last year, we talked about, well, what would be, how how does the 250 trees fit into CPC funding? And one of the elements of that was that if we put trees on school property, that or town property, that could be considered towards as part of our bucket for recreation spending, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right.
And so it's the fact that it's on school property does not preclude it from being recreation spending, but I think that there needs to be a real connection between the funding and townwide recreation, right? So there's not some percentage or some bright line test, but I think if we were looking at something for just to use something to illustrate the example, let's say we were talking about funding for the interior of the school gym, which would be locked outside the school day and only students could access it. I think that would be impermissible. But where you're talking about improvements to the landscaped area around the school, especially if there's a commitment from the school, for example, to make the playing fields available to community groups such as Concord Youth Soccer or Concord Youth Baseball, whomever, softball, that puts it in the bucket of being permissible, at least under the CPA. Whether we think that that's a good use of the funds versus some other recreation project is another matter. But I think I think this qualifies under the Community Preservation Act.
Okay, so it qualifies, but then the question is, if, for example, we thought it would be used 95% by the schools and only 5% by the public, we might choose to say to the applicant, look, find more of your money elsewhere and less of
Right.
your money will come from us. And by the way, this also applies to what might happen at the high school with the facilities building, if and when it may come up.
Right. I think, in fact, that would put even on more, would be even more of a question, because that's the facilities building will be so focused around high school athletic events in particular. I would think. I don't want to hog the air. Nancy.
Am I correct in remembering that there would be two separate entities that would organize activities for the public use? And then the school would have its own schedule? Paul may be going to speak to that, I don't know. But I thought I remembered that there was going to be some bright line there.
I think there's been, to answer that a little bit, I think there's been conversations definitely with the recreation director and conversation with Concord Youth Soccer. I encourage Lori and Justin Sparks to have those conversations than they did before they submitted the application.
Yeah.
So I imagine the weekends will be used by Concord Youth Soccer. I can't tell the percentage. And the recreation department will do some programming on this as well. Now, who manages that? I think that is more the recreation department. The recreation department will probably manage at Concord Middle School fields as well for off school activities. I think those agreements between the school department and recreation director are still being worked out for these new recreation properties. Middle school, which we did last year. Remember, we had a similar conversation, I think, and this one as well. So, Sue, I think you're right. There's a little ambiguity here, but I think there's a definite push and a willingness to kind of make these available to the public. And what percentage is still, I don't think we can quote that.
I actually asked when we were touring, I'm sorry, my fan went down and I think I was actually next, Burton. I asked when we were touring, would this be used by the public? And we got a fairly robust response that yes, it would be. After school, I mean, during school hours, it's pretty closely monitored, but after that, it's open for the neighborhood, it's open for the community.
I apologize for jumping on your time, Diane.
No, hon, no, not at all. I think you were next, but I mean, my hand somehow disappeared, but I just wanted to say that I did get to ask that question, so.
Okay. Eve.
Yeah, I think during her presentation, we asked Dr. Hunter the same question as well. And she mentioned that that while they do have to keep a careful watch on the kids during the school 6 hours of the 4 days, 5 days a week that the school is in session, that if anybody wanted to reserve part of this field, that they did have to do that outside of the school. So when Concord Youth Soccer decides to put games at those fields, they don't contact the school for that. They contact somebody over at rec. And also that it's not fenced off so that people can use it during those off school times for dog walking or recreating as if it were just a public park. She was pretty clear about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill.
So first question, and I missed the last meeting. This may have all been covered. It seems to be broken into 3 different areas, right? The blue area, the green area, and this yellow tan area. Do you have any idea why those areas have been broken down that way? I can see the bluish, whatever we call the teal colors, and I can see the fields there on Chase Road, which would have access for soccer. The one that's a bit confusing for me is the green, the 7, 8, 9, and 12. It's almost like 9 is a tennis court, and 7 and 8 is just putting new asphalt down and macadam down. Is that what that's all about? I may be getting too granular here, and just let it go. But does anyone have any sense as to how this was all broken down?
Yeah, I think that's hardscape. It's all hardscape.
All right. And do we normally support that kind of work, hardscape work?
Sure.
Yeah.
We do.
Playground.
Okay.
Playgrounds.
All right. That's it. I don't know. I don't know
That is
how much
wonderful.
further to go.
No,
I'm
it's
a
a
little-
wonderful question, I think. Yeah.
I'm a little I don't know. I'll just say it's fine. It's okay. I'm a little worried about the way I don't know why some of it wasn't picked up by the school committee. I know they don't have a lot of money, but
Spend a lot of money.
They have gobs of money. They just don't have quite enough.
right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that bears on a follow-on question I had looking at this document, which is I remember from the site walk that there was an explanation that the spiffy new playground, I think for the much younger set, which I believe is going in at number 12, unless it's possibly 10B or both of them, was going, they showed us that first and then said, well, we shouldn't have showed you this first because
Right.
we're actually going to be doing private fundraising for this part of the project, and what we're asking the CPC for is funding for other parts of the project. So I am now left very confused by this particular document. Does it cover the money that they're asking us for, or all of the money? And if it's all of the money, then what are they asking us for specifically?
Sue, I think there was a lot of confusion around that. I think there was confusion around, are we funding improvements to particular color coded segments here? How does it interact with what they're privately fundraising? But my sense was that what's shown on the screen here, 444,960, is what they're asking for from CPC, and that on top of that, in addition to that, they were going to be raising several $100,000, of which 200,000 plus had already been contributed for a new playground facility, and that's outside the scope of what they're asking for here.
Well, and I kind of had that idea too. I just couldn't tell it from this document, and I wonder if we should go ask them to submit a clarifying answer to us so that we have it in writing well understood.
Well, and one thing we oftentimes look for, and I don't have the actual application in front of me, is when we're weighing a particular application, does our investment spur additional resource, additional spending from other resources, right? Is it a sort of a spark for additional funding, and especially when it's non-town entities. Say if you're a nonprofit, would contribute a quarter of the cost of the project if you're raising 75% of the cost, or maybe the inverse of that.
In fact, I did just check the application, and under
Yeah.
the box for amount from other funding sources, it is not filled in. So presumably
So-
zero. Yeah.
Yeah. So that raises a question too. Is our intention here to unlock a larger, a contribution from the community? Or do we not so much care what happens with that, and we're perfectly happy to fund this project if if the only money that's spent on it is what CPC provides? There's some remaining questions here, I think. Paul.
Bert, my understanding exactly as you described it, and my son-in-law happens to be the PTG treasurer. They are doing a private fundraising for the playground equipment. If you look at this list here, they're preparing this green and yellow space for that equipment, but they're fundraising separately for the equipment itself. So I don't think we can clarify that, but I think the fundraising for the equipment, even though it says modular structure, so I think it's the area for the play areas structure area. It does say modular playground, but I don't think that's the equipment in there. It probably requires some clarification, but I do think they're not asking us for that playground equipment in here. And I think the reason why it's color coded here is because the application says athletic fields and green space. Of course, they've taken liberty with the green part of it, but so they wanted to kind of separate those two parts of the application.
Okay. And maybe that's something we could ask for, go back to the school with some additional questions around to clarify the fundraising they're doing. Eve.
Two comments. The first is probably the blue areas on the map should be green because those are the green space areas.
Oh.
That's usually how we draw the maps. But anyway, it does say on page.
That's true.
It does say on page 2 of the application under project budget that the entire project would cost approximately $672,000 some dollars. Now I know that number is different because they gave us this new breakdown, but that they are requesting support for 74% of the total budget, and the remaining is $200,000 in capital funds, which is the estate gift that they have solicited. So it is written in here how they're fundraising. They just didn't do the front page correctly, which is what Stu was picking up on. They could have put that in there in the front.
Yeah, I mean, and that even that statement about the project budget is a little confusing because it says the total cost will be $672,000. So they're asking for $500 from us, with the remaining 26% provided by $200,000 in CPS capital funds. That's a pretty big rounding up. And then it says this would be used in conjunction with a $200,000 estate gift. So is a $200,000 estate gift the capital funds? It's presumably, because otherwise we're up to $900,000. It's a little confusing, or maybe a lot confusing.
You knock something over?
Yeah, Bert, I think we need to go back to them to ask for clarification. And my very first point is: are they asking for 440,960, or are they asking for 500? If they're asking for 500, I'd like to see a budget for that 500.
Right. They do seem to have rounded things off.
Yeah.
Here.
Also, this does say this is the estimate cost plan, and so if they're claiming there's a lot more money, where would it be spent?
Yeah.
Where else is it going?
Yeah.
Parking lot, maybe.
Right.
And also,
I mean,
for a small note.
What's the total cost of their renovation?
Right.
Or their field renovations and parking, whatever it is.
Okay. So as I suspected, we have some questions here. Some of the discussion tonight went to, is this are we just funding a school project, or is this genuinely within a purview of the committee? I spoke to that a little bit. I think some other folks did. That there's precedent for doing this. I mean, one thing I would just comment on is, our last funding cycle had funding for school fields at the new middle school. And that was done in part based upon feedback at the prior town meeting around the community, the middle school funding, that the school committee and the school administration should go and look for other funding sources for things like this, and specifically talked about going to the CPC for funding. They did that. We then funded some funds for the middle school at the new middle school fields. And I think this is a continuation of that. Whether that's a good thing or not, leave it to the
Well, it
committee.
is, but if it was clear that there are additional funds, then it would look much better to the public that they're not asking for 100% of the school project to be funded by the CPC.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're taking us to this sort of the next point is like, can we get some clarity on what our funding represents in terms of the overall project? And it is our absent, for example, having the additional $200,000 in school capital funds, will this project proceed? Will it be half done? Will it be completed? To Bill's point, what's the complete total budget? We're seeing a budget number which is less than the even application number, with an allusion to a couple $100,000 extra money. I think we need some clarity on that. And Anne, maybe that's something we ask. Forgive me, because that middle school principals, Thoreau's gone through about 4 middle school principals since my kids were there. I'm forgetting the gentleman's name.
Justin Sparks.
Justin Sparks. Thank you so much, John and Paul. Maybe we could have Justin come back rather than require the superintendent to come back and provide some additional detail, or even in writing, just clarification would be helpful. John.
Yeah, what's the framework for, I mean, I think I totally agree. We should get more information, because I was confused even the last time we went with the superintendent and the principal about those green and yellow areas. Do we have a spot to fit them in before you have to turn in the warrant?
I think we do. I think we meet again on December. We meet in the second week of December, I think. We don't have a lot left to finalize, and the warrant would be going in January. And
no, I thought the warrant closes in February this year because of the unusual.
Oh, right, it's so much later. Yeah, I mean, but I think we'll be done with our work here, John, before the end of the year. But it would be nice to get some additional information before our next meeting and before I speak to the select board, because like I said, I think they'll have questions about this one.
Our next meeting's on the 10th.
10th of December, right. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you.
My little paper calendar, 10th of December.
And I think I'm speaking to the select board on the 9th, if I'm not mistaken, but.
It's the second.
But your conversation with them is not a definitive one, is it, Burton?
No, but
rough draft, right?
I'd like to be able to speak articulately to this particular application.
Whatever you do intelligently, Burton. We're not talking about that.
Yeah. That's what I play on TV. Okay. Do we have any other comments we want to make on this application? We've made some good progress. We're through 6 of our 7 with just a few remaining questions on this one. Okay. I'll double check the agenda. I don't think we had other items. Maybe what we can do is
public comment.
Well, just before we get to public comment, maybe we can get a sense of the room. We're going to have a big chunk of funding left over. We think it would appear that, if we fully fund, let's say we decide to fully fund this middle school project, which is our second biggest one, we are still going to have approximately, am I right? $1.4 million unspent across our accounts. The question is whether we leave that in undesignated funds or whether we seek to effectively, I want to tie the hands of a future constitution of this board and how we think that funding should be set aside for the future. So it's typical that that's done for open space because land acquisition costs being very lumpy, like I said. It could be that it's housing, or it could be that we think the schools are going to be coming for really big requests that we can squeeze into recreation. Any thoughts on that? Eve, you raised your hand first.
Yes, I just had a lot of fun with my calculator, and I just wanted to point out that I think we have to set aside about 78 grand for historic because we didn't make.
Oh, thanks for the
our-
reminder. Yeah.
I was just gonna
Yeah.
say.
Okay. Which is amazing going into the 250th that we've come up short of
Yes.
preservation. You'd think we would be oversubscribed. Diane.
Well, I was just going to say the same thing, that we have the historic preservation funding that we need to pay attention to.
Okay.
But since Eve has fun with her calculator, I don't. So thank you, Eve. I look at a calculator and blanch. So, and I'd like to go someplace on a trip. So if you just have some money left over, I mean,
I joked to Eve that this year we'll have the CPC holiday party at 80 Thoreau.
right, I think.
And of
Good
course,
one.
that's a joke. Ed.
Last year when we were talking about the refund on the Giroux house of about $240,000, we kind of had the same question, was should we put this in a reserve for housing? And my feeling, and I said it was my personal feeling, was that the committee has always considered housing needs, and there was no need for us to have a separate account for that. When I went back to the Housing Authority Board, they were really mad at me. But no, we need to have that money set for housing. So then I went back to Ann, and it turns out that the money had to go back into the account from which it came from. It couldn't, and again, as we saw this year, we got the 240,000 back into the housing again. So I trust the committee to take good care of housing, so as well as all the other ones. I mean, we're required to put 30% total for all the different groups, but that we've always had the best interests of the town.
Yeah, and maybe to draw that out a little further, I don't think there's any reason we need to do a designated reserve. Unless we're short in a particular category, as you talked about, that 30%. So maybe we want to give our future committees the most flexibility, or maybe we want to send a signal that what we think the priorities are. John.
Yes, we had a communication from the housing folks about setting something
sure did.
aside. Was there a number? I mean, I would be guided if I was moving in that direction. I'd be guided by their number. And I don't know whether...
I'm just going to pull up that letter quickly, or take a look at it. I don't know how to share it on the screen, but I think we got that was a letter of support from Concord Housing Foundation. They said, we note that requests received are less than available amount. I don't think they put a number on it. So we received a letter from the Concord Housing Foundation, and they just said, I think that they were just looking for us to consider future requests.
The letter from Stephen Bader did note the $240,000 that I just talked about.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But the letter we got from Frank Feely, I think, was the one that said, it was both in support of this year's allocation and also saying, hey, you're undersubscribed, so you should, we strongly urge you to retain these funds for future application.
Yeah.
And Keith has been silent on this, as far as we know.
On a particular number of requests for future years.
Yeah, or either a number or something.
Well, I think I could speak. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he would ask. He'd ask for it, and
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
urgently so.
The housing funding has always come from the CPC and the town.
Mm-hmm.
And with the transfer tax and things, we set up the mutual, affordable trust, thinking that we were going to get all this other money from the state, and that we would not be asking for so much from CPC and also from the town. But I think Keith realizes it's a long slog to get the state to approve what we've done on a town meeting, getting it through. The state legislature. So
And just to add onto that, so the funding sources for the trust, right, is I think largely was idea. I imagined that it would be that transfer tax, but it was also, as I recall from my time on the planning board, and Sue, maybe you can correct me here, is that sometimes with developments where there's a required contribution for the developer for affordable housing under a planned residential development, if you're not getting, it gives you flexibility so that when you're between, say, 4 units of housing and 8 units of housing, you don't have to build a unit of affordable housing. If that kills the project, you could contribute some financial amount to the trust, and so it gets you fractional contributions. Essentially, was part of it. So I really was clumsy in describing that, but that was part of it, and another funding source.
Okay, well, we were trying to do something with fractional contributions. We ran into some trouble with that. Well, there is the ability to do fractional contributions. I don't remember specifically whether it's for PRDs or across the board.
Yeah, I don't as well. But the idea, Ed, was for these smaller developments where you would see, we saw, for example, we saw a development where somebody proposed 6 units and they were going to build 1 unit of affordable housing, and somebody pushed them down to 5 units, and they said, oh, never mind, we'll just build 4 units of housing so that we don't have to contribute anything to the affordable because of the
right.
large jump, right? And so we said, oh, well, that's a bad result. Let's, if they could have built 5 units and contributed half the cost for a house, that would have been a much better result in the long run. So that was part of it. Bill.
I just still feel uncomfortable tying our hands. You never know what's going to happen next year. Who knows what develops in front of us. So we can still support the housing and probably very high priority, but let's not tie ourselves up. That's my opinion.
Okay, Linda, I see your hand raised. I'm just going to quickly go to Paul and Eve, and Paul.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with that point. I think to Ed's point, we've always been appreciative and generous, well, appropriately generous with the housing, and I have no reason to doubt that. I'd like to actually see how that money is being spent, for next year, what project's being spent, rather than just keep banking it. We're always going to have money for housing. I think 240 is going back into the housing reserve, and 250 is going into the open space reserve. So of the money we're talking about $500,000 is already earmarked to go back into reserves, even without further discussion. So I would keep the rest of it general and flexible.
Okay, and I do think that Keith provided some detail on the trust expenditures over the last year, and I'm sure there more detail will be provided at the roundtable, which unfortunately they ended up putting it on the same night as our committee hearing. So if anybody wants to skip dinner and go from, well, personally for me, go from my work day to a roundtable to this meeting for our next one, I think that's December 10th. Paula, you might get some more detail there. Eve?
I was just going to say I'm on team flexibility as well, because never before have people approached me to tell me they wanted to apply for CPC funds next year. And I've already had 3 people say that. And I just think we should be prepared for an avalanche of activity next year.
Yeah.
So you've been wearing that button I gave you that says, ask me about the CPC.
Damn you, Burden. Damn you.
Yeah. With that, Linda, if you'd like to, I'm sure you have a good point.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the quality of the photo here. I think my question may have just been clarified with the comment made by Paul, indicating that the 240 returned, 240K return from CHA will go into a housing reserve. And I think, and I should first say I'm a member of the trust, but I'm so as long as I understood that clarification, that's good. Thank you.
And Linda, just I think you just to clarify what you said, it was in it went back into the reserve that needed to be spent on housing, we are allocating it right back out to the trust as part of the 740,000. So it won't be in a reserve, assuming our article proceeds at town meeting. It will be allocated to the trust as of next summer. So the
Okay,
money came
I
back to
understood.
us, and at that point it was designated for housing, and we're adding $500,000 to that for the 740,000 request this time around.
Okay, good, good. I'm glad I asked for the clarification then. Thank you.
And while we have Linda for a minute, Linda, has the town discontinued it, what was for many years a kind of automatic $500,000 every year contribution? I mean, that's my understanding, right?
We had an initial, CMAT had an initial, the trust had an initial $500,000 contribution. We received ARPA funds of 500,000 this year. We do not anticipate that going forward necessarily.
Thank you. That's what I wanted. Thank you. Excuse me for bumping in.
Thank you.
Sue.
Well, first of all, with inflation, CMOT should be asking for more than the 500,000 it was asking for in the beginning. But second of all, do I understand correctly that the advantage of putting money into a particular reserve, suppose we were to put money into the housing reserve, is that next year when we're required to put a minimum of 30% into different buckets, the money that had already gone into the reserve would not have to obey that percentage-wise distribution, so it would be a way to, in essence, get more than 30% of the money into housing if that's where we put it, and not be forced to, for example, put, this year we have to put 78,000 into the reserve for historic preservation. Is that right?
Well, I think I get what you're saying, and it would be.
And I said
if-
advantage because I'm actually
I-
on team flexibility. I'm just curious about how this reserve.
Yeah, I think you said if it was more than 30%. I think what might come into play, and I'm speculating here because I don't have the CPA open in front of me, but if we wanted to spend more than 80%, meaning we were going to force the other two categories to less than the required 10% for those categories. So if we wanted to spend more than 80% for one category, it might be the case that would be that the funding that came from a prior year would not count towards that 80%. That's possible. We've certainly never seen anything come remotely close to that, but we might. That's a really good question, Sue, that I think requires reading the CPA. I don't think we want to go and ask town council to give us an answer because that would maybe not be the best use of our funds, but it might be worth digging into it. It might be a question actually, Anne, for the coalition. And I guess if I were to ask the question more generally for the coalition, what are the considerations for why you would make a specific designated reserve other than meeting the 10% threshold? Because maybe there's something we're not thinking of. Would those Sue seem is you? That's a really good thought, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to be with Linda. I know she originally thought there'd be a 240,000 housing reserve. So I guess I'm the dissenter on the complete flexibility because I think there's an important message. If we have a modest, I would say 250,000 housing reserve, just indicates our continued support in that area. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's a good discussion. I think we've covered. Yes, Diane.
I just want to say, I think, John, that comment suggests, I know it's not what you mean, but let me just say that it could suggest that we are not always supportive of housing. I mean, this committee in the 7 years that I've been, or the 6 years that I've been on it, has always been proactively. I mean, I don't know that we need a public statement on that behalf. It's part of what we do, and it's part of our commitment. At least I feel that that's a well-established precedent, but you're the lawyer. Is it a well-established precedent? And we know from our Supreme Court that precedents can be overturned with careless abandon, but it seems to me.
We have the same, we take the same approach for open space because we believe that that's an important one to have. to have a reserve. I think this is another one to indicate our ongoing support with a reserve. But I mean, I hear everybody else about flexibility. I just think this is one I would move for a reserve, just like the one we do for open space.
And part of, maybe it speaks to the fact, I mean, I think this comes in maybe up more when we are oversubscribed, as we have been in virtually every other year, I think every other year. And you decide not to fund a project, but you're going to otherwise allocate some of the funds, and you want a justification for why that's being allocated and not spent. Maybe that's part of it. It's also, I think, it's not so much saying, hey, we're committed to open space or housing, but really putting a target on it for, say, hey, we've got, we've built up a fund of, let's say, $500,000 for open space. We should be thinking about, can we preserve open space in town because we've got that funding built up. I think it sends a message. I could go either way. Ed.
Just to note for Diane, we were turned down for a request about 10 years ago for on Bedford Court. There's a 1860 house there, and we asked for funds to put a kitchen in, and we were turned down because it was a renovation rather than preservation. So, so there, we were kind of searching for something to ask for at that time. So I guess we understood that we really didn't qualify as what a CPC is supposed to do. So we have been turned down. So put it that way. So.
Okay.
The problem with long memory.
Well, I was quite upset.
Yeah, I can tell.
Paul.
Yeah, just clarification. The reason why we're going to have 250,000 in open space, because that we're not putting it in there. That's coming back from the old Christopher Heights project, and it was designated for open space. It goes back into that reserve. So we're not adding open space reserve.
Oh, thank you for that clarification, Paul. So so the amount of that funding that Ann mentioned, that we've got 250,000, that's in the reserve, not because we decided to do that, but because it came back from the Christopher Heights allocation we previously
did. Yeah, that's my understanding. They came back last year or the year before, I think so.
Oh, that's a really excellent point, right? So for people that weren't on the committee, as part of developing Junction Village, there was an ambitious plan to develop a park on a portion of that parcel, to leveraging some of the land clearing that the developer would be doing, and putting that in, to create a community space. When that project fell apart, of course, that park also essentially fell apart. And the fact that we have $250,000 sitting in an open space reserve sort of signals that if whatever ends up happening, well, now there's so many variables now that it's the prison redevelopment, but that funding was originally intended for a park there, and maybe that would be revived. That's a really great point. Thank you, Paul. Talk about long memories. That's really valuable. Sue.
I thought that we do have an affordable housing reserve. It's just that with our change in model in the last couple of years, we store it in CMOT. And that's a little odd to store the CPC money in CMOT as affordable housing reserve, but they are able to act more quickly than us because they don't have to wait for an entire funding cycle. It's not exactly the same, but it is effectively an affordable housing reserve.
I think it's analogous, but in terms of whether the committee's committing its funds that are sitting in our bank, it's kind of different. But I see your point. Okay, this has been a really great discussion. I think where we are, we have 7 applications. 6 we've said that we would support funding in full. 1 we've got some additional questions on, which may affect the funding level based upon what the actual budget number is, and one of which may just be to say, hey, we want some commitments or covenants in that grant agreement. And I think it would be helpful to get, if it's possible, to get some additional feedback from the applicant there, and also potentially just, if it's something you're able to ask the CPA folks, whether there's anything we're overlooking on why you would want to do a designated reserve other than meeting your 10% threshold. That would be very helpful.
Okay.
And I guess ultimately we would need to decide for historic preservation, is our number whatever gets us pencils out right at 10%, or are we putting in, you know, $100,000 or whatever it may be, and coming up with that number? I think all things we will be able to decide within the course of our next meeting. With that, I'd like to open it up to any public comment. We've got Mary Hartman and Kathy Kuklo. If you would like to say anything.
Yeah, let
Mary.
me just quickly. So Burton, I've got you on the December 2nd agenda to come to the
Oh, is
select
that the
board.
second? Okay,
Yeah,
that's why I
yeah.
couldn't see it on my calendar.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
second. And I think at the
Thank you.
beginning of the meeting, you mentioned the select board goals and how the spending that the applications you're looking at align with select board and FinCom goals, if I understood you correctly. And if I look at the
I
applications.
was thinking
that
more
are-
with FinCom, but yeah.
Okay, well, anyway, if
Yeah.
I look at what's in front of you this year, the only one that clearly aligns would be the housing, the 740,000 to housing, because we have a specific goal under diversity, equity, and inclusion, actually, to bring more economic diversity in to the town through workforce housing. So that clearly aligns. The others, we don't have goals that address recreation and open space. So that's just for your information. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mary. I was thinking, you know, as you're well aware, there was a little bit of a give and take with FinCom around town meeting last year, where there was some discussion as to whether, well, my sense of it was, is what are the applications that are coming from the town departments to the CPC aligned with FinCom's long range planning, financial planning. Kathy, maybe you want to speak to that. So you're looking at me maybe a little skeptically, and maybe I've misinterpreted.
I think you're putting me a little bit on the. I wasn't aware that there was that comment that that CPC should be aligned with FinCom goals. So I really can't speak to last year.
Okay, fair.
I do think I was going to speak up earlier about the amenities building at the high school. I mean, that certainly was something, it was several $1 million, and it, as you all know, as the whole town knows, there's a lot of conversation about school spending and the FinCom guidelines. So to the extent, I do think, in my opinion, to the extent that community preservation funds could be used to help schools put in various facilities around the playing fields would be very helpful to the town. But my understanding has been for the last several years that affordable housing is the #1 driver funding. Because the town used to be able to, and Mary, you were part of this, the town used to be able to apportion 500,000 of free cash to affordable housing, which we cannot do anymore. So
that's you're correct. Yeah.
That was my comment about that, the deficit of that, that it was automatic is too strong a word, but it seemed a routine.
It was
automatic.
It was a tradition.
A tradition. I like that. That's a better choice.
But it's the free cash balances have come down. It had to end. So anyway, I appreciate all the work you guys do.
And Kathy, I don't mean to make assumptions about FinCom. FinCom weighed in a way that they hadn't done previously last year on our article. I just one thing, I think you mentioned the priority being housing. I believe overall, in terms of what CPC has funded in the history of the CPA Act, the CPA being adopted by Concord, that a slight majority of the funding, or not majority, the largest share has actually been open space, and that's shifted over time, and is going more now towards housing. But there used to be more emphasis on open space, which is reflected in, for example, the long range plan that ended in, that was the 2010 plan was the focus was more on open space, whereas the 2020 long range plan, there was a shift. And I think that's reflected in CPC funding as well.
So our biggest goal is increasing tax revenues. So if you folks can figure out how to increase tax revenues, we'll be very, very appreciative.
Figure out how to designate a light industrial park as recreational.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that. So I'm definitely in support of that, but it may not be within CPC's ability other than yeah. Well, Ed.
Just to answer Kathy about the $500,000 coming from free cash. That when we passed the transfer tax, at town meeting, the assumption was that it was going to go through. And this money would be coming, and so it was never considered to be a permanent amount. It was just an indication that the town would get it started, so we could get the trusting. And I also want to point out my background with the plinth, which I understand CPC helped restore and correct the names of all the Civil War.
Civil War, yeah.
And
Ed, I keep meaning to call that out. Thank you so much for calling, for mentioning that. I'd seen the article in the Bridge. They did, and I walked around it about a week and a half ago to see if the new plaque was up, and it wasn't up when I walked around it.
Yeah,
but I was very glad to hear that that's been done.
Yeah, they put it up last Saturday, and it was a wonderful ceremony. Actually, it's really nice.
That was top 3 CPC project in my mind.
Reenactors. So.
Yeah. I remember Diane and John. I know you probably remember Nancy when we got the presentation there, standing at the base of the obelisk, and gosh, it was great, and I loved that we could contribute to that,
and all
that we could help the town
little
contribute.
Letters from the students. Oh my gosh!
Oh yes,
that was just famously wonderful application.
Yeah, sometimes government makes you skeptical, and sometimes you realize you can do some, does some great things. So that was great.
I can add to this little love fest in that my office took a tour of the Wright Tavern, and we got to go upstairs in the attic, and I got to see, and I took photos of and can share what the CPC funds have done in that building in the form of humongous steel structural members holding up that building now. It's basically a tent around this incredibly large steel structure that our funds provided.
That's great. That's really great. All right. Well, great discussion. It's nice when we're undersubscribed. It makes our deliberation somewhat easier. But nonetheless, I think we dug into these applications with giving them the diligence it was due. And we've got some remaining questions on the school application on the Thoreau School application, and I think we'll resolve that. And I wish we could have an in-person holiday gathering at 80 Thoreau, but we didn't get our application in for funding in time. So can't do that. All right. With that, I will call the meeting adjourned, and I hope everybody has a lovely Thanksgiving holiday.